sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. In a world where first impressions can mean life or death, appearances become weapons more powerful than any gun. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a woman whose carefully crafted disguise fooled everyone from street criminals to military generals, until the moment she chose to reveal who she really was. What started as routine undercover work in the roughest neighborhoods of Chicago became a mission that would change military intelligence forever. Her story proves that sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight, and the most effective disguise is the one that makes people laugh instead of look closer. The morning sun barely touched the cracked sidewalks of South Chicago when Maria Santos stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic. To anyone watching, she looked like just another young woman trying to make it through another day in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods. Her oversized hoodie hung loose over ripped jeans, and the colorful tattoo sleeve covering her right arm caught the light as she locked her car door. But appearances can be deceiving, especially when they're designed to be. Maria had spent 3 years perfecting this persona. Every detail was calculated, from the way she walked with a slight slouch to hide her military posture, to the fake nose ring that made her look younger than her 28 years. The tattoo that drew the most attention was actually the newest addition to her cover, a vibrant sleeve of roses and butterflies that had taken months to complete. Most people saw it and immediately made assumptions about who she was and what she represented. Those assumptions were exactly what kept her alive. "Yo, check out the butterfly girl," laughed Marcus, a local dealer who controlled 3 blocks of territory around the area. He was sitting on the steps of an abandoned building with 2 of his crew members, watching Maria walk past like they did every morning. "Girl thinks she's some kind of artist or something with all them pretty pictures on her arm." Maria heard the comment but didn't react. She'd been hearing similar remarks for months now. The tattoo had become her trademark in the neighborhood, a visual cue that marked her as harmless. Just another young woman trying to express herself through body art, probably working some minimum wage job to pay for her next piece of ink. The reality was far different. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been deployed twice to Afghanistan before being recruited for a highly classified domestic intelligence operation. Her mission was to infiltrate a network of former military personnel who were selling stolen weapons to street gangs across Chicago. The investigation had been ongoing for 2 years with little progress until Maria's commanding officer realized they needed someone who could blend into the neighborhood without raising suspicion. That's where the tattoo came in. The idea had come from Maria herself during the planning phase. "Everyone expects military personnel to be clean-cut and professional," she'd explained to Colonel James Harrison during one of their briefings. "But gang members and street dealers, they respect certain types of rebellion. A woman with visible tattoos sends a specific message about not following society's rules." Colonel Harrison had been skeptical at first. "You're talking about permanently altering your appearance for an undercover operation. That's beyond what we typically ask of our personnel." "With respect, sir, this isn't a typical operation," Maria had replied. "These weapons are ending up in the hands of teenagers who are using them to kill other teenagers. If getting some ink on my arm helps us stop that, I'd consider it a small price to pay." The colonel had eventually approved the plan, but not without reservations. Military regulations regarding tattoos had relaxed somewhat in recent years, but a full sleeve was still pushing the boundaries. Maria would need special permission to continue her military career after the operation concluded. She didn't care. The mission was too important. The network they were tracking wasn't just selling a few handguns here and there. Intelligence indicated that military-grade weapons, including automatic rifles and explosives, were being funneled from army bases to urban gang conflicts. The operation was sophisticated, involving active-duty personnel, veterans, and civilian contractors who had access to weapons storage facilities. Maria's job was to establish herself as a potential buyer for a local gang that intelligence believed was connected to the network. It meant spending months building relationships, earning trust, and slowly working her way up the chain of command until she could identify the key players. The neighborhood where she operated was controlled by a gang called the Iron Wolves, led by a man named Vincent Torres. Torres was smart, paranoid, and careful about who he did business with. He'd grown up in the area and knew everyone, which made infiltration extremely difficult. Most law enforcement operations had failed because outsiders stood out immediately. But Maria wasn't just any outsider. She'd grown up in similar neighborhoods in Los Angeles before joining the military. She understood the culture, the language, and the unwritten rules that govern street life. More importantly, she understood that respect wasn't given freely in these areas. It had to be earned through consistency, loyalty, and the right kind of reputation. The tattoo helped with that reputation in ways she hadn't expected. Maria, right? The voice belonged to Sofia Reyes, a woman about her age who worked at the corner store where Maria bought her morning coffee. Sofia had been watching Maria for weeks, clearly curious about the newcomer who didn't quite fit the neighborhood's usual patterns. "Yeah, that's me," Maria replied, keeping her voice casual while her mind catalogued everything about Sofia that might be useful. The woman wore expensive jewelry despite working a retail job, had perfect nails despite handling merchandise all day, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had connections. "Love your ink," Sofia continued, nodding toward Maria's exposed arm. "Where'd you get it done?" "Shop downtown called Sacred Arts," Maria lied smoothly. She'd researched real tattoo parlors and even visited several to make her story believable. "Took like 6 months to finish the whole thing. Must have cost a fortune." "Worth every penny," Maria said, rolling up her sleeve slightly to show more of the design. "Had to work extra shifts at the restaurant for months to pay for it, but sometimes you gotta invest in yourself, you know?" Sofia nodded approvingly. "I respect that. Most girls around here, they get some cheap work done in somebody's basement and wonder why it looks like garbage in a year." This was exactly the kind of conversation Maria had been hoping for. Sofia was clearly someone with connections and opinions about the neighborhood. More importantly, she was showing approval for Maria's choices, which could lead to introductions to other people. "I figure if you're gonna mark your body permanently, might as well do it right," Maria replied. "Plus, I like how it makes people react. Some folks see the tattoos and immediately think they know what kind of person I am." "And what kind of person do they think you are?" Maria smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The kind who doesn't follow rules." Sofia laughed at that. "Honey, around here, following rules is how you end up broke or dead." "Sometimes both." Over the following weeks, Maria began to understand the complex social structure of the neighborhood. There were the obvious players like Marcus and his crew who controlled street-level drug sales, but there were also more subtle power brokers. People like Sofia who seemed to work legitimate jobs but clearly had their fingers in various enterprises. Elderly residents who commanded respect despite having no obvious source of income. Young men who dressed like students but carried themselves like soldiers. The Iron Wolves weren't just a gang in the traditional sense. They were more like a neighborhood government, controlling everything from who could operate businesses to who was allowed to move into available apartments. Vincent Torres rarely appeared in public, but his influence was felt everywhere. Maria's breakthrough came unexpectedly during her 6th week in the area. She was walking home from her supposed job at a restaurant across town when she heard shouting from an alley behind the corner store. Her military training kicked in immediately, and she found herself moving toward the commotion despite knowing it could blow her cover. 3 men had cornered a teenager who couldn't have been more than 16 years old. They weren't from the neighborhood, Maria could tell immediately from their clothes and the way they carried themselves. The kid was local though, and he was scared. "Where's our money, Carlos?" one of the men was saying. He was tall and thin with prison tattoos covering his neck. "You had 2 weeks to come up with our cut." "I told you, I'm still working on it," the teenager replied, his voice shaking. "Business has been slow, man. Give me a few more days." "Few more days?" The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is a charity? You think we're here to help your broke ass?" Maria watched from behind a dumpster, her mind racing. The smart thing to do was walk away and pretend she'd never seen anything. Getting involved in neighborhood disputes wasn't part of her mission, and it could expose her if things went wrong. But the kid reminded her of her younger brother, who'd been killed in a drive-by shooting when Maria was 19. She joined the military partly to get away from neighborhoods like this one, and partly to find a way to fight back against the violence that seemed to consume young lives. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria stepped into the alley. "Hey Carlos," she called out, her voice carrying a confidence she'd learned to fake years ago. "Your sister's looking for you. Says dinner's ready." All 4 people in the alley turned to look at her. The 3 men immediately tensed, their hands moving toward weapons Maria was sure they were carrying. The teenager looked confused but hopeful. "This ain't your business, butterfly girl," the leader said, recognizing Maria from around the neighborhood. "Keep walking unless you want to become part of the problem." Maria looked at him steadily, her hands visible and empty but her posture suggesting she wasn't intimidated. "Carlos is practically family. His business is my business." She was taking a huge risk. If these men were connected to the Iron Wolves, interfering could ruin months of careful work. But if they were outsiders trying to muscle in on local territory, helping the kid might actually improve her standing with the people she was trying to reach. "You sure you want to do this?" the man asked, stepping closer to Maria. "We don't have problems with girls who mind their own business." "I'm sure," Maria replied, noting the way he moved and the slight bulge under his jacket that indicated a concealed weapon. "But I think you might want to reconsider what you're doing here." "And why's that?" Maria smiled, the same expression she'd used with Sofia weeks earlier. "Because this is Iron Wolf's territory, and Vincent Torres doesn't like people conducting business in his neighborhood without permission." The mention of Torres' name had an immediate effect. The 3 men exchanged glances, and Maria could see them reassessing the situation. Either they knew who Torres was and respected his authority, or they were smart enough to understand that throwing around his name meant she might have connections they hadn't considered. "You know Vincent?" the leader asked, his tone more cautious now. "I know enough," Maria replied, which was technically true even though she'd never actually met the man. "And I know he likes to keep the neighborhood peaceful for the families who live here." It was a calculated gamble based on everything she'd learned about the area's power structure. The Iron Wolves maintained control partly through fear, but also through a certain code that protected non-combatants. Children, elderly residents, and people just trying to live their lives were generally left alone as long as they didn't interfere with business. The standoff lasted nearly a full minute before the leader stepped back. "This ain't over, Carlos," he said, pointing at the teenager. "You still owe us, and we're gonna collect one way or another." The 3 men walked away, but Maria could tell they weren't happy about backing down. She'd made enemies today, which could complicate her mission in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," Carlos said once the men were gone. He was still shaking slightly, but his voice was stronger. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." "Just be more careful about who you owe money to," Maria replied. "And maybe find a way to pay what you owe before they come back." As she walked away, Maria realized that word of this incident would spread quickly through the neighborhood. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the girl with the butterfly tattoo had stood up to outside threats and invoked Vincent Torres' name to do it. It might help her mission, or it might get her killed. But, for the first time since arriving in the neighborhood, Maria felt like she was making progress towards something that mattered. The next morning brought unexpected consequences. Maria had barely finished her coffee when Sofia appeared at her usual table in the corner store's small seating area. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday," Sofia said, sliding into the plastic chair across from Maria. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were alert and focused. "Just helped a neighbor," Maria replied, keeping her own voice neutral. "Nothing major." "Nothing major," Sofia repeated, laughing softly. "Girl, you threw Vincent Torres' name around like you had the right to do it. That's either very brave or very stupid." Maria met her gaze steadily. "Maybe a little of both." "Carlos is my cousin," Sofia continued, which explained how word had traveled so quickly. "What those men were doing to him, that was wrong. But getting involved the way you did, that was dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because now people are going to assume you have connections you might not actually have," Sofia explained. "And if Vincent finds out someone's using his name without permission, he might decide to have a conversation with you about it." This was exactly what Maria had been hoping for, though she couldn't let that show. Getting Vincent Torres' attention had been one of her primary objectives, but it had to happen in a way that didn't make her look like law enforcement or competition. "I can handle my own conversations," Maria said. Sophia studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? I believe you can. Most people around here, they talk tough but fold the minute things get real. You stood up to 3 grown men yesterday without even knowing if backup was coming." "Backup?" "Carlos called his older brother right after you left. Danny and his crew were ready to come handle things if those guys came back. But by then, you'd already solved the problem." Maria filed away the information about Carlos having an older brother with crew connections. Every detail about neighborhood relationships could prove useful later. "I didn't know Carlos had family looking out for him," she said. "He does now," Sophia replied. "And so do you, if you want it." The offer was significant. Family connections in neighborhoods like this one carried both privileges and responsibilities. It meant protection and support, but it also meant obligations and the potential for getting dragged into conflicts she hadn't started. "What does that mean exactly?" Maria asked. "It means people are going to start looking at you differently," Sophia explained. "Before yesterday, you were just the girl with the pretty tattoos who kept to herself. Now you're the girl who stands up for family and isn't afraid to invoke power when she needs to." "And that's good or bad?" "Depends on what you're trying to accomplish," Sophia said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you trying to accomplish, Maria?" It was a direct question that required a careful answer. Maria had spent weeks building a reputation as someone who was just trying to get by in a tough neighborhood. But yesterday's actions suggested she might have bigger ambitions or connections. "I'm trying to survive," Maria said, which was true enough. "And maybe find opportunities to do better than just survival." "What kind of opportunities?" Maria took a sip of her coffee, buying herself time to think. This could be the opening she'd been waiting for, but pushing too hard too fast could ruin everything. "The kind that require people to trust you with serious business," she said finally. Sophia nodded slowly. "That kind of trust takes time to build around here. It also takes the right introductions." "I'm patient," Maria replied. "And I'm good at showing people they can depend on me." "We'll see," Sophia said, standing up from the table. "Danny wants to meet you. Tonight, 8 o'clock, at the garage on Elm Street. Don't be late." After Sophia left, Maria sat in the corner store for another hour, processing what had just happened. Danny was Carlos' older brother, which meant he was likely connected to the Iron Wolves in some capacity. A meeting with him could be the break she needed to start moving up the chain toward the weapons dealers. It could also be a test to see if she was law enforcement. Maria spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting in ways that wouldn't be obvious to anyone watching. She researched everything she could remember about Danny Reyes from her mission briefings, though information about lower-level gang members was often incomplete. She also thought through various scenarios for how the meeting might go and what responses would best serve her cover identity. Most importantly, she checked in with her handler through the secure communication system they'd established. Colonel Harrison needed to know about this development, even though there wasn't much he could do to help if things went wrong. The message she sent was brief and coded, needing new business contact tonight. "Opportunity looks promising." His response came back within an hour, "Proceed with caution. Assets in position if needed." That was reassuring, though Maria knew that any backup would have to come from outside the immediate area. Having law enforcement suddenly appear during a gang meeting would destroy her cover permanently. The garage on Elm Street was exactly what Maria had expected. It was a legitimate auto repair business during the day, but after hours it served as an unofficial meeting place for neighborhood business that couldn't be conducted in public. The bay doors were closed when she arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, but a side door opened as she approached. "You're Maria," said the man who answered the door. He was young, maybe early 20s, with the kind of build that suggested he spent time in a gym. His voice was respectful but cautious. "I am," she replied. Danny asked to see me. He's inside. Follow me. The interior of the garage was dimly lit by overhead fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Several cars in various states of repair filled most of the space, but there was a clear area in the back where folding chairs had been arranged around a makeshift table. 3 men were waiting for her. Danny Reyes was easy to identify because he looked like an older version of his brother Carlos. He was probably in his mid-20s, with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that suggested he was comfortable with violence but didn't rely on it as his first option. The other 2 men were obviously security. They positioned themselves where they could watch both Maria and the entrances, their hands visible but ready to move quickly if necessary. "Thanks for coming," Danny said, gesturing for Maria to take a seat across from him. "My cousin Sophia says you helped my little brother yesterday." "I did what anyone should do," Maria replied, settling into the metal folding chair. "Carlos is a good kid. He didn't deserve what was happening to him. Those men who were pressuring him, they're not from around here," Danny continued. "They're part of a crew that's been trying to muscle in on our territory for the past few months." "I figured they weren't local," Maria said. "They carried themselves wrong for this neighborhood." Danny smiled at that observation. "You notice things. That's good. Around here, noticing things can keep you alive. It's kept me alive so far." "Sophia also says you mentioned Vincent Torres yesterday. That was either very smart or very dangerous." "Probably both," Maria admitted. "But it worked." "It worked because you were right about how those men would react to hearing his name," Danny said. "But using someone's reputation without their permission can cause problems." This was the moment Maria had been preparing for all day. Danny was clearly leading up to something, and her response would determine whether she gained access to higher levels of the organization or ended up as another missing person in a neighborhood where people disappeared regularly. "I understand that," she said. "And I understand that respect has to be earned, not borrowed." "Good," Danny replied. "Because Vincent wants to meet you." Maria felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, but it was also extremely dangerous. Vincent Torres was the key to the entire operation, but he was also smart enough to spot law enforcement infiltration. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. Same time, different place. Sophia will give you the details." "What should I expect?" Danny leaned back in his chair, studying Maria carefully. "Vincent likes to understand people before he decides whether to trust them. He'll want to know where you came from, why you're here, and what you can offer." "And if he doesn't like my answers?" "Then you'll disappear," Danny said matter-of-factly. "Not as a threat, just as information. Vincent doesn't take chances with people who might cause problems." Maria nodded, appreciating his directness. "I understand." "I hope you do," Danny replied, standing up to indicate the meeting was over. "Because once you meet Vincent, there's no going back to being just another girl with pretty tattoos." As Maria walked back to her car, she realized that everything was about to change. Tomorrow night's meeting would either advance her mission significantly or end it permanently. Either way, she was ready. The butterfly tattoo on her arm caught the streetlight as she unlocked her car door, its colors seeming to shift in the shadows. Tomorrow, those butterflies might finally emerge from their disguise. Maria spent the next day going through the motions of her cover life while her mind focused entirely on the evening's meeting with Vincent Torres. She worked her shift at Romano's, a family restaurant 20 minutes outside the neighborhood where she supposedly earned her legitimate income. The job was real enough to provide verifiable employment history, but flexible enough to accommodate her actual mission requirements. "You seem distracted today," observed Mrs. Romano, the owner's elderly mother who helped manage the front of house. "Everything okay, dear?" "Just tired," Maria replied, refilling salt shakers with mechanical precision. "Haven't been sleeping well lately?" It wasn't entirely a lie. The stress of maintaining her cover while getting closer to dangerous people was taking its toll. Every conversation had to be calculated, every gesture considered for what it might reveal about her true identity. The margin for error was shrinking as the stakes increased. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, Blue Moon Club, 10 p.m. Ask for Miguel at the door. The Blue Moon was a bar that catered to working-class locals, the kind of place where people minded their own business and paid in cash. Maria had driven past it several times but never gone inside. It was exactly the kind of venue Vincent Torres would choose for a meeting, public enough to seem normal, but controlled enough to ensure privacy. She left Romano's at 7:30, giving herself time to prepare properly. Appearance would be crucial tonight. Too casual and she might seem disrespectful. Too formal and she'd look like law enforcement or someone trying too hard to impress. Maria settled on dark jeans, a fitted black sweater that didn't hide her tattoos, and boots that were comfortable enough to run in if necessary. She kept her jewelry minimal, small hoop earrings and a simple chain necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The look was polished but authentic to her cover identity. The Blue Moon's exterior was nothing special, a simple storefront with neon beer signs in the windows and a heavy wooden door painted navy blue. The neighborhood around it was quiet at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, with just enough foot traffic to provide cover for anyone who might be watching the meeting. Miguel turned out to be a massive man in his 40s who looked like he'd spent time in prison. He had the kind of presence that ended conversations and cleared spaces without any obvious effort. "You're Maria," he said when she approached the door. It wasn't a question. "I am." "ID." She handed over her driver's license, knowing it would check out under any scrutiny. The identity had been carefully constructed with real documents and verifiable history. Miguel examined it under a small flashlight before returning it. "Vincent's waiting inside. Follow the bar to the back room. Don't stop to talk to anyone else." The interior of the Blue Moon was exactly what Maria had expected: dim lighting, worn wooden furniture, and the smell of cigarettes and beer that had soaked into every surface over the years. A dozen patrons sat at various tables and along the bar, but none of them looked up as she passed. The back room was separated from the main bar by a heavy curtain. Maria pushed through it to find herself in a space that was clearly designed for private meetings. The lighting was better here, and the furniture was newer. A round table sat in the center with 4 chairs around it. Vincent Torres was not what she had expected. Based on intelligence reports and neighborhood reputation, Maria had anticipated someone intimidating and obviously dangerous. The man who stood to greet her was average height with graying hair and the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, looking more like a middle school teacher than a gang leader. That made him more dangerous, not less. "MS. Santos," he said, extending his hand for a firm but not aggressive handshake. "Thank you for joining me tonight." "Thank you for the invitation," Maria replied, noting that he'd used her last name despite the fact that she'd only given people her first name in the neighborhood. He'd done his homework. "Please, sit," Vincent said, settling into the chair across from her. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water would be good." He poured from a pitcher that was already on the table, adding ice from a small bucket. The gesture was courteous but also practical. It demonstrated that the drinks weren't drugged or tampered with. "I understand you helped young Carlos yesterday," Vincent began, his tone conversational but his eyes alert. "That was kind of you." "It was the right thing to do," Maria replied. "Those men were threatening a kid who lives in the neighborhood. They were also threatening the stability that we work very hard to maintain," Vincent continued. "Outsiders coming in to collect debts or settle scores, that creates problems for everyone." "I can see how it would." Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying Maria with the kind of attention that made her aware of every detail of her appearance and behavior. "Tell me about yourself, Maria. Where did you come from before you moved to our neighborhood?" This was the moment she'd been preparing for since the operation began. Her backstory had been rehearsed and refined until it felt natural, with enough truth mixed in to pass careful scrutiny. "I grew up in Los Angeles," she said. "East Side, near downtown. My family moved around a lot when I was young because my mom could never hold jobs for very long. What kind of jobs? Restaurant work mostly. Some cleaning services. She had trouble with drugs, so employers would eventually figure that out and let her go. The drug addiction was a fabrication, but the moving around was based on Maria's real childhood. Her family had actually moved frequently because her father was in the military, but for different reasons it had created a similar experience of always being an outsider. What about your father? Vincent asked. Never really knew him, Maria lied smoothly. He took off when I was about 3. My mom said he was in the army, but she might have been making that up. Difficult childhood then. Could have been worse. At least we usually had a place to live, even if it wasn't permanent. Vincent nodded, making mental notes about everything she said. How did you end up here in Chicago? Bad relationship, Maria said, which was becoming a more comfortable lie each time she told it. Guy I was with in LA, he started getting violent. I had enough money saved to get out, so I bought a bus ticket and ended up here. Why Chicago specifically? It wasn't specifically anywhere, she replied. I just needed to get far enough away that he couldn't find me easily. Chicago seemed big enough to disappear in. It was a story that would resonate with Vincent because it explained why she was alone in a new city without local connections. It also suggested she might be running from something, which would make her more likely to avoid law enforcement contact. And you've been here how long? About 8 months now. Took me a while to find work and get settled. Vincent poured himself water from the same pitcher, a gesture that suggested he was satisfied with her answers so far. Sophia tells me you're interested in opportunities beyond restaurant work. I am, Maria confirmed. I'm good at what I do, but waiting tables isn't going to get me very far in life. What kind of opportunities interest you? This was where the conversation became truly dangerous. Maria needed to express interest in illegal activities without being specific enough to incriminate herself if the meeting was being recorded. The kind where being reliable and discreet matters more than having the right education or connections, she said carefully. Those opportunities often come with significant risks. So does being poor, Maria replied. At least with risk comes the possibility of reward. Vincent smiled at that answer. You're practical. I like that. Tell me, when you invoked my name yesterday, did you know who I was? I knew you controlled territory in the neighborhood, Maria said. I didn't know much beyond that, but I figured mentioning your name would carry more weight than threatening to call the police. Why not call the police? Because police don't solve problems around here. They just create different problems. And, you think I solve problems? Maria met his gaze directly. I think you understand that some problems are worth solving and some aren't. Those men threatening Carlos, that was worth solving. Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering her response. What makes you think you'd be good at the kind of work I might have available? I notice things, Maria said, echoing what Danny had told her the night before. I can keep my mouth shut about what I notice. And I'm not afraid to handle difficult situations when necessary. Handling difficult situations sometimes requires difficult choices. I understand that. Do you? Vincent leaned forward slightly. Because once you start down this path, there's no going back to your simple restaurant job and your quiet life. The people you work with become your family, but they also become your responsibility. Their problems become your problems. Maria felt the weight of his words, knowing they applied to her situation in ways he couldn't imagine. The people she really worked for had already become her family in a sense, and their problems were definitely her problems. I'm looking for family, she said, which was true even though not in the way Vincent would interpret it. I'm tired of being alone. That answer seemed to satisfy something in Vincent's assessment of her character. Sophia says you have good instincts about people. What's your read on me? It was a test, and Maria knew her answer would determine everything that followed. She took a moment to study Vincent the way he'd been studying her, considering not just what she saw but what would be useful for him to hear. You're smarter than you let people think, she said finally. You run an organization, not just a gang. You think long-term instead of just reacting to whatever happens. And you're careful about who you trust because you understand that one wrong person can destroy everything you've built. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested approval. All true. What else? You're testing me right now to see if I'm smart enough to be useful and trustworthy enough to be safe. But you're also deciding whether I'm someone you can teach or someone who thinks she already knows everything. And which are you? Someone who knows enough to be valuable but smart enough to learn from people who know more. Vincent was quiet for nearly a full minute, thinking through whatever decision he was making. Maria forced herself to remain calm and patient, knowing that pushing for an answer would demonstrate exactly the wrong kind of character. There's someone I'd like you to meet, he said finally. But first, I need to know you understand the commitment you'd be making. I understand. No, you don't, Vincent replied firmly. Because understanding and experiencing are different things. The work I do requires absolute loyalty and complete discretion. People who violate that trust don't get second chances or warnings. They simply disappear. Maria nodded, keeping her expression serious. I understand the stakes. The person I want you to meet can provide the kind of opportunities you're looking for. But he's careful about who he works with, and he has very specific requirements for people in his organization. What kind of requirements? Reliability above everything else. The ability to handle valuable merchandise without asking unnecessary questions. And the intelligence to follow complex instructions without supervision. Valuable merchandise. That was likely referring to weapons, which meant she was getting close to the actual purpose of her mission. I can handle all of that, Maria said. We'll see, Vincent replied, standing up to indicate the meeting was ending. Sophia will contact you with details about the next meeting. In the meantime, continue your normal routine. Don't change anything about how you behave or where you go. Understood. And, Maria, Vincent added as she prepared to leave, the people we work with have ways of verifying everything they need to know about a person's background. Make sure there's nothing in your past that would surprise them. It was both a warning and a threat, delivered with the kind of casual authority that suggested Vincent Torres was used to being obeyed without question. There won't be, Maria assured him, hoping her carefully constructed identity would hold up under whatever scrutiny was coming. As she left the Blue Moon, Maria realized that her mission had entered a new phase. She was no longer just observing and gathering intelligence. She was about to be invited into the actual criminal organization, which would provide access to the weapons trafficking network but also expose her to much greater danger. The butterfly tattoo on her arm seemed heavier somehow as she walked to her car, as if the weight of what it represented was finally becoming real. 2 days later, Sophia appeared at Maria's usual morning coffee spot with information about the next meeting. Thursday night, 9 o'clock, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the small table. Address is written down. Ask for Roberto when you get there. Maria glanced at the address, noting it was in an industrial area about 10 miles from the neighborhood. What should I expect? Roberto handles special merchandise for Vincent, Sophia explained. If he likes you, you'll start getting work that pays much better than waiting tables. And if he doesn't like me? Sophia's expression became serious. Then, you go back to your normal life and forget you ever met any of us. Roberto doesn't give people second chances. That evening, Maria sent another coded message to Colonel Harrison, meeting with primary contact Thursday. Significant development expected. His response was immediate: surveillance team will maintain distance. Emergency extraction available if needed. The knowledge that backup was available was reassuring, but Maria knew that calling for extraction would mean abandoning the mission completely. Too much work had gone into getting this close to the weapons network to give up now unless there was no alternative. Thursday arrived with unexpected complications. Maria's shift at Romano's ran late because 2 servers called in sick, forcing her to cover additional tables. By the time she could leave work, she barely had time to change clothes and drive to the meeting location. The address led her to a warehouse district where most of the buildings appeared to be either abandoned or used for storage. The specific building she was looking for was a nondescript concrete structure with loading docks and a small office entrance. A single car was parked in the lot, a new BMW that seemed out of place in the industrial setting. Roberto turned out to be a man in his 50s with the kind of expensive clothes and careful grooming that suggested significant income from whatever business he conducted. He was waiting in what appeared to be a converted office space inside the warehouse, sitting behind a desk that had clearly been brought in specifically for meetings like this one. "Miss Santos," he said when she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat in front of his desk. "Vincent speaks very highly of you." "I'm honored by his confidence," Maria replied, noting that Roberto's accent suggested he was originally from somewhere in Central America, possibly El Salvador or Guatemala. "Confidence has to be earned," Roberto said, opening a file folder that contained what looked like background information. "Tell me, what do you know about import and export businesses?" "I know they involve moving merchandise from one place to another," Maria said carefully. "And I know that success depends on reliable transportation and trustworthy people." Very diplomatic answer. "What do you know about moving merchandise that requires special handling?" This was clearly a reference to weapons or other illegal goods. Maria needed to show interest without demonstrating knowledge that would suggest law enforcement background. "I know that some merchandise is more valuable than others," she said. "And that valuable things require extra care and security." "Exactly," Roberto replied, seeming pleased with her response. "The business I run involves very valuable merchandise that requires very careful handling. My clients pay premium prices because they know their orders will be filled correctly and delivered safely." "What kind of merchandise?" "The kind that people need but have difficulty obtaining through normal commercial channels," Roberto said, which was probably the most carefully neutral description of weapons trafficking Maria had ever heard. "I understand. Vincent tells me you're reliable and discreet. He also says you're not afraid to handle difficult situations. All of those qualities are important in my business. I try to be someone people can depend on." Roberto pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk where Maria could see it. It showed a wooden crate about the size of a large suitcase, sitting in what looked like the back of a truck. "This is an example of the kind of merchandise I handle," he said. "Crates like this need to be picked up from specific locations and delivered to specific customers. The work pays well, but it requires absolute reliability." Maria studied the photograph, noting details that might be useful for intelligence purposes later. The crate had military-style markings that suggested it contained weapons or ammunition. The truck appeared to be civilian, but the loading area looked like it might be part of a military or government facility. "What would my responsibilities be?" she asked. "Initially, you would accompany experienced drivers on delivery runs," Roberto explained. "Your job would be to ensure that merchandise reaches customers safely and that any problems during transport are handled appropriately." "What kind of problems?" "Sometimes law enforcement becomes interested in our vehicles. Sometimes customers aren't completely honest about their ability to pay. Sometimes merchandise goes missing during transport. All of these situations require people who can think quickly and handle pressure." Maria nodded, understanding that he was describing situations that might require violence or other criminal activity. "I can handle pressure." "We shall see," Roberto replied, closing the file folder. "Vincent has recommended that we offer you a trial position. You would work with one of our regular drivers for 3 delivery runs. If those go well, we would discuss more permanent arrangements." "What kind of permanent arrangements?" "The kind that provide steady income and opportunities for advancement," Roberto said. "My business is growing, and I'm always looking for people who can take on greater responsibilities." Greater responsibilities likely meant moving up the chain toward whoever was supplying the weapons from military sources. That was exactly what Maria needed to identify the key players in the trafficking network. "I'm interested," she said. "Excellent," Roberto replied, standing up to indicate the meeting was over. "Sophia will contact you with details about your first assignment. Be ready to travel on short notice, and make sure you have reliable transportation." "I will." And, Miss Santos, Roberto added as Maria prepared to leave, the people we do business with value professionalism above everything else. Dress appropriately, arrive on time, and remember that you represent my organization when you're working. As Maria left the warehouse, she realized that she was now officially part of the weapons trafficking network she'd been investigating for months. The next phase of her mission would involve actually handling stolen military weapons and meeting the people who were buying them. It was exactly what she'd been working toward, but it was also the most dangerous position she'd ever put herself in. The butterfly tattoo on her arm caught the warehouse's security lighting as she walked to her car, its bright colors a stark contrast to the dark industrial landscape around her. Soon, those butterflies would be flying into territory where one wrong move could be fatal. But they were finally close enough to their target to make the risk worthwhile. On Friday morning, Maria received a text from Sophia with instructions for her first delivery assignment, Sunday, 2 p.m. Meet Jorge at the diner on Route 47. Bring overnight bag. An overnight bag meant the delivery would involve significant travel, possibly to another state. Maria would need to prepare carefully for an assignment that could take her far from any possible backup support. She spent the weekend researching the route and potential destinations, using her knowledge of military bases and weapons storage facilities to guess where they might be traveling. She also made sure her emergency communication devices were fully charged and properly concealed. Sunday afternoon found her at a truck stop diner that catered to long-haul drivers and travelers. Jorge turned out to be a man in his 30s with the weathered appearance of someone who spent most of his time on the road. He was drinking coffee at a corner booth when she arrived. "You're Maria," he said, looking her up and down appraisingly. "Roberto says you're new to this kind of work." "I am," she confirmed, sliding into the booth across from him. "But I learned fast." "Good, because this isn't the kind of work where you get to make mistakes twice," Jorge replied. "You understand what we're doing? Moving valuable merchandise that requires special handling." "That's one way to put it," Jorge said with a slight smile. "More directly, we're delivering military equipment to people who aren't supposed to have it. If we get caught, we go to prison for a very long time." His directness was surprising but also reassuring. Maria had been wondering how much the organization would trust her with specific details about their operations. "I understand the risks," she said. "Do you understand the benefits?" Jorge asked. "Because this run, if it goes smooth, you'll make more money than you probably make in 2 months at that restaurant." "How much?" $5,000 cash, Jorge replied. "Roberto pays well because he expects the best." $5,000 for a single delivery run suggested they were moving very valuable merchandise indeed. Military weapons on the black market commanded premium prices, especially if they were current models or specialty equipment. "What do I need to do?" Jorge pulled out a map and spread it on the table between them. "We're driving to St. Louis. Should take about 5 hours each way. We pick up our cargo from a contact there, then deliver it to customers in 3 different locations around the city." 3 different customers? 3 different orders in the same shipment, Jorge explained. "More efficient that way, and it limits how many trips we have to make into certain areas." Maria studied the map, noting the routes Jorge had marked and the neighborhoods where deliveries would be made. 2 of the delivery locations were in areas she recognized as having high gang activity. The third was in a more suburban area that might indicate a different type of customer. "What kind of customers are we delivering to?" "People who pay cash and don't ask questions," Jorge replied. "Roberto's built his reputation on reliability and discretion. Customers know they can depend on us to deliver what they order without complications." "And the merchandise comes from where?" Jorge gave her a look that suggested she was asking questions that were better left unasked. "The merchandise comes from people who have access to it. Where exactly it comes from isn't something we need to worry about." It was a clear message that curiosity beyond immediate job requirements wasn't welcome. Maria filed away the information that the weapons were coming from somewhere in the St. Louis area, which would help intelligence analysts narrow down potential sources. "When do we leave?" she asked. Right now, Jorge said, standing up and leaving money on the table for his coffee. Truck's outside. We'll be back by tomorrow night if everything goes according to plan. The truck was a commercial moving van, the kind used by furniture companies and small shipping businesses. It was clean and well-maintained, with proper commercial license plates and inspection stickers that would pass casual examination by law enforcement. "This your truck?" Maria asked as they climbed into the cab. "Roberto owns it," Jorge replied, starting the engine. "He owns 3 of them, all properly registered and insured. Part of looking professional." As they pulled onto the highway heading toward Este Louis, Maria realized that she was finally getting a view into how the weapons trafficking operation actually functioned. It wasn't the crude, obviously criminal enterprise she might have expected. Instead, it was a sophisticated business with proper equipment, careful planning, and attention to details that would help it avoid detection. That made it more dangerous, but also more valuable to shut down. The drive to St. Louis gave Maria an opportunity to learn more about Jorge and the organization he worked for. He'd been making deliveries for Roberto for almost 3 years, earning enough money to support his family while avoiding the more violent aspects of gang life. "I used to work for people who solved problems with bullets," he explained as they passed through small Illinois towns. "Roberto's different. He solves problems with planning and professionalism." "How did you start working for him?" "Same way you did. Vincent recommended me after I helped out with some neighborhood problem. Roberto gave me a trial run, I did good work, and now I'm one of his regular drivers." "You ever have problems with law enforcement?" Jorge shook his head. "That's the beauty of Roberto's operation. We don't look like criminals, we don't act like criminals, and we don't do business with people who can't keep their mouths shut. Most cops see a moving truck with proper paperwork, they assume it's legitimate business. What about the customers? They ever cause problems?" "Sometimes," Jorge admitted. That's part of why Roberto started having 2 people on delivery runs. If a customer gets stupid about payment or tries to short the order, it helps to have backup. As they approached St. Louis, Maria felt her pulse quicken. She was about to see the supply side of the weapons trafficking network, which could provide crucial intelligence about how military equipment was being stolen and transported. The pickup location turned out to be a storage facility in an industrial area near the airport. Jorge drove to a specific unit and knocked on the roll-up door in a pattern that was obviously a code. The door opened to reveal a man in military fatigues who looked like he was currently serving in the army. Maria felt a chill as she realized she was looking at an active-duty soldier who was stealing weapons from his own military base. This wasn't just street crime anymore. It was treason. "You're early," the soldier said to Jorge, checking his watch. "Traffic was lighter than expected," Jorge replied. "This is Maria, Roberto's new person." The soldier looked Maria over with professional assessment, his eyes lingering on her tattoos. "She know what she's getting into?" "She knows enough," Jorge said. "Roberto vouches for her." The soldier nodded and gestured for them to enter the storage unit. Inside, Maria saw wooden crates identical to the one in Roberto's photograph, along with military equipment that made her stomach clench with recognition. These weren't just handguns or hunting rifles. These were assault weapons, ammunition, and equipment that could outfit a small army. The butterfly tattoo on her arm seemed to burn as she realized that some of this equipment might have been used to protect her and her fellow soldiers in Afghanistan. Now it was being sold to criminals who would use it against American civilians. But she was finally inside the network, with access to the information that could shut it down completely. The hardest part of her mission was just beginning. The storage unit contained enough firepower to equip a small militia. Maria forced herself to remain calm as she took mental inventory of what she was seeing, knowing that every detail would be crucial for the intelligence report she would eventually file. "Let's get loaded up," the soldier said, checking his watch again. "I need to be back on base in 2 hours." Jorge opened the back of the moving truck while Maria tried to process what she was witnessing. The soldier was young, probably early 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested this wasn't routine for him despite his apparent familiarity with the process. First time working with Roberto's people, he asked Maria as they began loading wooden crates into the truck. First time doing this kind of work at all, Maria replied truthfully. Stick with Jorge, the soldier advised. He knows how to handle customers who get difficult. The crates were heavier than Maria had expected, requiring 2 people to lift them safely. Each one was marked with military designation codes that she recognized from her own service. This equipment wasn't surplus or obsolete gear. It was current-issue material that should have been secured in military weapons storage. How much are we carrying? She asked Jorge as they finished loading. About $200,000 worth, he replied casually, as if discussing the price of groceries. Good week for Roberto. $200,000 in a single shipment meant this operation was moving serious volume. Maria made mental notes about the quantities and types of weapons, knowing that intelligence analysts would use this information to track what was being stolen and from which facilities. The soldier handed Jorge a manila envelope that presumably contained delivery instructions and payment information. Standard locations for the drops, he said. But be careful with the third delivery. Customers been asking questions about source and availability. What kind of questions? Jorge asked. Wants to know if we can get specific equipment on request. Heavier stuff than what we usually handle. Maria felt her blood run cold. Heavy equipment meant explosives, anti-tank weapons, or other military hardware that could cause massive civilian casualties. This trafficking network wasn't just supplying gang conflicts. It was potentially providing equipment for terrorist attacks. Roberto know about the customers' requests? Jorge asked. He's handling it, the soldier replied. But be ready for attitude when you make that delivery. As they drove away from the storage facility, Maria struggled to maintain her composure. She had infiltrated a weapons trafficking network that was far more extensive and dangerous than anyone had realized. Active-duty military personnel were stealing current equipment, professional criminals were distributing it through established networks, and customers were requesting items that could only be intended for large-scale violence. You okay? Jorge asked, noticing her silence. Just thinking about what we're carrying, Maria said. It's a lot of responsibility. First time's always the hardest, Jorge replied. After a while, you realize it's just business. We're providing a service that people need. What kind of people need military weapons? Jorge glanced at her with an expression that suggested she was still asking naive questions. People who live in places where the police can't or won't protect them. Business owners who need to defend their property from gangs. Citizens who want to exercise their constitutional rights. It was a rationalization that Maria had heard before from people involved in illegal weapons sales. They convinced themselves they were serving a legitimate purpose, providing protection and constitutional rights rather than enabling violence and crime. What about the third customer? She asked. The one asking for heavier equipment? That's not our business, Jorge said firmly. We deliver what Roberto tells us to deliver. What customers do with it after that isn't our responsibility. The first delivery was in a neighborhood that reminded Maria of the area where she'd built her cover identity. They pulled up to an auto repair shop where several young men were waiting in the parking lot. The transaction was quick and professional. Jorge presented credentials, the customers inspected merchandise, and cash changed hands without extended discussion. Smooth, Jorge commented as they drove away. Good customers pay promptly and don't cause drama. The second delivery was more complicated. The customer was late to the meeting point, forcing Jorge and Maria to wait in a fast food parking lot for nearly an hour. When the buyer finally arrived, he complained about the prices and tried to negotiate a discount on his order. Prices are set by Roberto, Jorge explained patiently. I don't have authority to change them. Come on, man, the customer argued. I've been buying from you guys for months. Shouldn't that count for something? The negotiation went on for 15 minutes before the customer finally paid the agreed amount. Maria observed the interaction, noting how Jorge remained professional but firm throughout the process. This wasn't amateur criminal activity. It was a legitimate business operation that happened to involve illegal merchandise. The third delivery took them to a suburban area that was clearly more affluent than the previous locations. The meeting point was a warehouse in an industrial park where legitimate businesses operated during regular hours. "This the customer who's been asking questions?" Maria asked as they approached the building. "Yeah," Jorge replied, his tone becoming more cautious. "Just follow my lead and don't volunteer any information." The customer turned out to be a man in his 40s wearing expensive casual clothes and driving a luxury SUV. He had the kind of confident bearing that suggested military or law enforcement background, but something in his manner made Maria immediately suspicious. "You're new," he said to Maria before even acknowledging Jorge. "She works for Roberto now," Jorge explained. "Maria, this is Mr. Patterson." Patterson studied Maria with the kind of attention that made her wonder if he suspected something about her identity. "What's your background, Maria?" "Restaurant work mostly," she replied, sticking to her cover story. "Just started doing deliveries recently." "Ever handle serious equipment before?" "Depends what you mean by serious." Patterson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I mean equipment that requires special training to operate safely. Military-grade material that most people wouldn't know how to use properly." The conversation was making Jorge nervous. Maria could see him shifting his weight and checking the exits, preparing for the possibility that this meeting could go wrong quickly. "I learn fast," Maria said, trying to project confidence without seeming too knowledgeable. "I'm sure you do," Patterson replied. "Tell me, what do you think about current military operations overseas? Afghanistan, Iraq, that kind of thing?" It was an odd question for a weapons buyer to ask, and Maria felt alarm bells going off in her mind. Normal customers would focus on merchandise and payment, not political discussions about military operations. "I try not to think about politics," she said carefully. "Too complicated for someone like me." "Someone like you," Patterson repeated. "What exactly does that mean?" Jorge stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Patterson and Maria. "Can we focus on the delivery? We've got other stops to make tonight." Patterson ignored Jorge's attempt to redirect the conversation. "I'm curious about your perspective, Maria. A young woman with military-style tattoos working in weapons distribution. That's an interesting combination. Military-style tattoos." Patterson had noticed something about her appearance that suggested military background. Maria's butterfly and rose sleeve had been carefully designed to avoid obvious military symbolism, but someone with training might recognize subtle details that civilians would miss. "It's just artwork," Maria said, rolling up her sleeve slightly to show more of the design. "I like the colors." Patterson examined her arm with obvious interest. "Beautiful work. Very detailed. Must have taken months to complete." "About 6 months total," Maria replied truthfully. "Expensive too, I imagine." "Worth it though." "Where did you serve?" Patterson asked suddenly. The question hit Maria like a physical blow. Somehow, Patterson had identified her as military despite all her precautions. She had seconds to decide how to respond without blowing her cover completely. "I didn't serve anywhere," she said firmly. "I just like the tattoo style." "Bullshit," Patterson replied calmly. "Your posture, your situational awareness, the way you scan exits when you enter a room. You're military or law enforcement." Jorge was reaching under his jacket for what was probably a concealed weapon. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Maria realized that her mission might be about to end in violence. "Look, man," Jorge said to Patterson, "if you don't want the merchandise, just say so. We can take it somewhere else." "Oh, I want the merchandise," Patterson replied, his attention still focused on Maria. "But I want to understand who I'm doing business with." Maria made a split-second decision to partially reveal her background while maintaining her cover. "I was Army," she admitted. "But that was a long time ago, and I don't talk about it." "What unit?" Patterson pressed. Military police, Maria lied, choosing a specialty that would explain her alertness without suggesting special training. Served my time, got out, tried to build a normal life. And ended up delivering weapons to people like me. I ended up doing whatever work pays the bills. Patterson seemed satisfied with that answer. Fair enough. Military background actually makes me more comfortable doing business with you. Shows you understand the value of good equipment. The tension in the air decreased slightly, but Maria could tell Jorge was still ready for trouble. Patterson completed his purchase without further incident, but the encounter left both of them shaken. What the hell was that about? Jorge asked as they drove away. I don't know, Maria replied, which was partially true. She didn't know why Patterson had been suspicious or what his real agenda might be. You never told me you were military. I don't talk about it, Maria said. Too many bad memories. Jorge nodded, accepting her explanation. Just be careful about admitting that to customers. Some of them have issues with military people. What kind of issues? The kind that assume anyone with military background might be working for law enforcement. Maria felt a chill at those words. If other customers started suspecting her military background, her cover could be compromised beyond repair. But she'd had to reveal something to Patterson or risk a violent confrontation. The drive back to Chicago gave Maria time to process what she'd learned during the delivery run. The weapons trafficking network was larger and more sophisticated than initial intelligence had suggested. It involved active-duty military personnel, professional criminal organizations, and customers who might be planning large-scale attacks. More importantly, at least one customer was specifically suspicious of new people in the organization. Patterson's questions suggested he might have law enforcement or intelligence background himself, which raised the possibility that the trafficking network was already under investigation by other agencies. Good work today, Jorge said as they unloaded the empty truck back at the original meeting point. Roberto will be pleased that everything went smooth. Even with Patterson's questions? Patterson always asks questions, Jorge replied. He's careful about who he does business with. But you handled it right. Maria received her payment in cash as promised, $5,000 for one day's work. It was more money than she'd ever made in such a short time, which helped her understand why people got involved in this kind of operation despite the risks. That night, she filed her first detailed intelligence report about the weapons trafficking network, using secure communication channels to transmit information about sources, distribution methods, and customer profiles. The response from Colonel Harrison came back within hours, excellent progress. Continue building relationships with key players. Intelligence suggests major operation planned within 2 weeks. A major operation within 2 weeks meant that whatever the trafficking network was supplying weapons for was about to happen. Maria needed to identify the target and the people involved before civilians got killed with military weapons that should never have left secure storage. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Sofia. Roberto wants to see you today, she said without preamble. 2 o'clock at the usual place. Any idea what he wants? He's got another job for you. Bigger than yesterday's run. A bigger job meant more weapons, more money, and more risk. It also meant Maria was gaining access to higher levels of the trafficking operation, which was exactly what her mission required. The warehouse meeting with Roberto felt different this time. He seemed more relaxed, more willing to treat Maria as a trusted member of his organization rather than someone under evaluation. Jorge says you handled yourself well yesterday, Roberto began. Even with Patterson's interrogation. He was just being careful about who he does business with. True, but some people don't handle that kind of pressure well, Roberto replied. You stayed calm and gave appropriate answers. That suggests you can be trusted with more sensitive assignments. What kind of assignments? Roberto pulled out a different photograph, this one showing what appeared to be a convoy of military vehicles. Sometimes our merchandise comes from sources that require more complex pickup procedures. Instead of meeting one person at a storage facility, we might need to intercept transport vehicles or coordinate with multiple suppliers simultaneously. Intercepting military transport vehicles was a significant escalation from the storage facility pickup Maria had witnessed. It suggested that the trafficking network had access to classified information about military shipments and the capability to conduct operations against moving targets. "That sounds more complicated," Maria said. "It is," Roberto confirmed. "But it's also more profitable." "Much more profitable." "How much more profitable?" $25,000 for a successful intercept operation. $25,000 for a single job meant they were targeting extremely valuable cargo. It also meant the operation would be much more dangerous, with potential for armed resistance from military escorts. "When would this happen?" Maria asked. "Next week. Tuesday night, somewhere between Chicago and Milwaukee. We have information about a transport carrying specialty equipment that several customers have requested." "What kind of specialty equipment?" Roberto's expression became more serious. "The kind that requires federal licenses to possess legally. The kind that customers pay premium prices to obtain through alternative channels." Federal licensing requirements suggested explosives, automatic weapons, or other equipment that was heavily restricted even for civilian law enforcement. Whatever they were planning to steal would be valuable enough to justify the extreme risks of attacking a military convoy. "How many people would be involved in something like that?" 6 or 7, Roberto replied. "Experienced people who know how to handle complex operations. You would be part of the support team, helping with transportation and security." Maria realized she was being offered a chance to witness or participate in what amounted to an armed robbery of military equipment. The intelligence value would be enormous, but the personal risk would be extreme. "I'm interested," she said, knowing she had no choice but to accept if she wanted to complete her mission. "Excellent," Roberto replied, standing up to indicate the meeting was over. "Sophia will contact you with preparation instructions. Make sure you're available Tuesday afternoon through Wednesday morning." As Maria left the warehouse, she realized that her mission was approaching its climax. Within a week, she would either help law enforcement shut down a major weapons trafficking network, or she would be discovered and killed by the people she was investigating. The butterfly tattoo on her arm caught the afternoon sunlight as she walked to her car, its bright colors a reminder of the transformation she'd undergone to reach this point. Soon, those butterflies would either emerge victorious or be crushed in the process. Either way, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was ready for whatever came next. On Thursday morning, Maria received detailed instructions for the upcoming intercept operation. The information came not from Sophia but from a new contact, a man who identified himself only as Alex and spoke with military precision that suggested Special Forces background. "Tuesday intercept requires advanced surveillance," Alex explained during a brief phone call. "Meet me Friday night for reconnaissance briefing. Location will be texted to you 1 hour before meeting time." Advanced surveillance meant the trafficking network had access to military transportation schedules and route information. Someone with high-level security clearance was providing intelligence that enabled them to target specific convoys carrying valuable equipment. Maria spent Thursday and Friday maintaining her normal cover routine while preparing for what might be the most dangerous phase of her mission. She checked her emergency communication devices, reviewed extraction procedures with her handlers, and mentally rehearsed various scenarios for how the intercept operation might unfold. The Friday night meeting took place at a truck stop near the Wisconsin border, far from the Chicago neighborhoods where Maria had been building her cover identity. Alex turned out to be a man in his 30s with the controlled movements and alert eyes of someone who'd seen combat. "You're Roberto's new person," he said when Maria found him at a corner booth in the truck stop's restaurant. "I am." "Military background?" Word about her admission to Patterson had apparently traveled through the organization. Maria nodded, sticking to the cover story she'd already established. "Army MP," she confirmed. "Few years back." "Good," Alex replied. "This operation requires people who understand tactical thinking." He spread a road map on the table, pointing to a highlighted route between 2 military installations. "Tuesday night, convoy leaves Fort McCoy at 11 p.m., heading for Great Lakes Naval Station. 3 vehicles, probably 6 to 8 personnel total. What are they transporting? Electronic equipment that several of our customers have specifically requested. Very valuable, very portable, very difficult to obtain through normal channels. Electronic equipment with restricted availability suggested communications gear, surveillance technology, or weapons guidance systems. Any of those items would be extremely valuable on the black market and potentially devastating in the wrong hands. How do we know their route and timing? Alex smiled grimly. We have friends in useful places. Friends in useful places meant someone with access to classified military transportation information was providing intelligence to the trafficking network. That person would be a high-priority target for military intelligence once the operation was shut down. What's the plan? Simple and effective, Alex explained, tracing the route with his finger. Convoy has to stop at this checkpoint about halfway through their route. We create a minor traffic incident that forces them to wait while we transfer their cargo to our vehicles. What kind of traffic incident? Broken down truck blocking the road. Happens all the time, nothing suspicious about it. While they're waiting for the road to clear, our team removes their cargo and disappears. And the convoy personnel? Non-lethal approach if possible, Alex said. These are American military people doing their jobs. We don't want to hurt them unless they force us to. It was a surprisingly restrained approach for a criminal operation, suggesting that the trafficking network's leadership understood the difference between weapons theft and assaulting military personnel. Killing soldiers would bring much more aggressive law enforcement response. How many people on our team? 7 total. 3 for the traffic incident, 2 for cargo transfer, 2 for security and communications. What's my role? Communications and backup security, Alex replied. You'll monitor radio traffic and be ready to handle problems if anything goes wrong. Maria felt relief that she wouldn't be directly involved in the robbery itself. Monitoring communications would give her valuable intelligence while keeping her somewhat removed from the most serious criminal activity. When do I learn more details? Monday afternoon. Final briefing at a different location. Come prepared to travel and work through the night. As Maria drove back toward Chicago, she realized that she now had enough information to alert law enforcement about the planned convoy intercept. But doing so would end her infiltration of the trafficking network before she could identify all the key players and sources. The decision of when to reveal her true identity and call for law enforcement intervention was becoming more complex with each new development. Saturday brought an unexpected complication when Maria encountered Detective Raymond Hayes from the Chicago Police Department during her shift at Romano's restaurant. Excuse me, miss, he said, approaching her table while she was refilling condiment containers. I'm Detective Hayes with CPD. Could I ask you a few questions? Maria's heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to remain calm. Hayes was a middle-aged man with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much urban violence. His presence could mean her cover was blown or it could be coincidence. Sure, she replied, keeping her voice casual. What about? There was an incident in your neighborhood few weeks back. 3 men threatening a local teenager. Witnesses say a woman intervened and mentioned Vincent Torres' name. Hayes was investigating the incident where Maria had helped Carlos. It was possible he was just following up on gang activity, but it was also possible someone had identified her as a person of interest. I might have seen something, Maria said carefully. But that area gets a lot of foot traffic. Hard to know what you're referring to specifically. Young man named Carlos Reyes. 3 men cornering him in an alley behind the corner store on Maple Street. Oh, that, Maria said, as if suddenly remembering. Yeah, I saw some guys hassling a kid. Didn't seem right, so I told them the kid's sister was looking for him. Witnesses say you mentioned Vincent Torres by name. Did I? Maria asked, projecting confusion. I might have said something about neighborhood rules. Honestly, it happened pretty fast. Hayes studied her carefully, clearly trying to determine if she was being truthful. What's your connection to Torres? I don't have one, Maria replied, which was technically true. I just know he has influence in the area, and sometimes mentioning names makes people think twice about causing trouble. You know Torres has influence, but you don't have a connection to him? I pay attention to how things work in the neighborhood, Maria said. Doesn't mean I'm personally involved in anything. Hayes seemed to accept that explanation, but he wasn't finished with his questions. What kind of work do you do, Miss Santos? The fact that he knew her last name meant he'd done background research. Maria hoped her carefully constructed identity would hold up under police scrutiny. I wait tables here, she said, gesturing around the restaurant. Sometimes I pick up extra work doing deliveries for local businesses. What kind of deliveries? Food, mostly. Sometimes office supplies or packages for people who don't want to deal with regular shipping companies. It was a plausible explanation that would account for any surveillance that might have noticed her meeting with Jorge or visiting unusual locations. Anyone in particular you do delivery work for? Different people, Maria replied. Word gets around that I'm reliable, so people call when they nay.